Hello, welcome back to my channel. I am Four Corners of the Page. I'm really glad you're here, and today what I want to do is I would like to finish up a trilogy of videos that I have been making in the past week and a half, discussing Stephen King. Now, the first video I made was about 8 or 9 days ago, and that was more of an introduction to Stephen King. What I liked about him, what I love about him, what people sometimes get wrong about him, and basically just a general gush really about this man and his work that I enjoy so much. I followed that up a few days later with a tier list ranking of Stephen King. I've read about 60 of his books so far, and I wanted to put them in order in terms of just kind of raw enjoyment. And I know that's kind of a doomed venture in some way, because you have books that are more literary than others, some that are very pulpy but still pretty good, and it's kind of hard to quantify them in that way as I did, but hey, I did it anyway. And I really enjoyed the conversation that came down in the comments as a result of that video. I do stand by some of my picks, but you have made me want to pick up a few more, and I am deeply curious. Someone commented about the Tommyknockers. I'm aware the Tommyknockers is seen as Stephen King's wildest, weirdest, in some ways worst book. Oh, I want to get to it. This video is just going to be more of an elevator pitch about the Stephen King books that I would recommend people start with, right? Because I know, for example, if you're looking to get into Stephen King, but you walk into Waterstones or Barnes & Noble, whatever your bookshop of choice is, you will look at the wall and you will see hundreds of books often, signed by Stephen King, but written by Stephen King. And it's hard to know where to start, especially because some of those books have kind of the names themselves have a pedigree about them, right? You hear Pet Sematary, you know of Pet Sematary, that title has kind of transcended into pop culture, just the name itself. Same thing with Carrie, same thing with It, same thing I would say with The Green Mile, with The Stand. All these titles throw themselves at you and you don't quite know what to make of them. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give 60 or 70 second pitches about the Stephen King books that I think are most worth your time. This is also partly because I have been talking with another YouTuber, a booktuber who started the same time as me, called The First Chapter with Chris. Hi Chris, I think you're magnificent. What Chris has done is he has started this channel with the premise that he has never read a book in his adult life, and he is just slowly working through books trying to catch up, which I think is a brilliant idea. And I know he's just started Stephen King, and he was asking where do I recommend that he goes with that kind of new project of his. So Chris, I know you already started Pet Sematary, but if you're looking for a second book, here are the ones I would recommend to you. Again, I'm going to try and keep this to 60, 70 seconds. We'll start with the classic. I want to choose one Stephen King book that I think is worth your time, that has that name, that pedigree behind it, and that for me is going to be The Shining. I love The Shining, without getting into spoilers, because it exemplifies what Stephen King can do, as well as what he often, most commonly tries to do with his books. You have this horror element to The Shining of the Overlook Hotel, which I won't get into too much. You have this beautiful but very casual style that just carries you through these 400, 500 pages of prose. But again, what you really have at the heart of this book, without going into major spoilers of The Shining, is a character study. You have this man called Jack Torrance and his family, and Jack is embittered and he's angry and he has a substance addiction problem, and he is trying to be a better person. He is really trying to be a better person. And he takes his family to the Overlook Hotel under the impression that it's going to be a caretaker job that he is going to do in the winter to kind of get some money and maybe start writing his book. But things slowly start to unravel for him. And I'm not going to say where the horror of this book comes from, but I do believe what makes this book so great is that it's not just simply a supernatural thing where bad things happen because of the spooky ghosts and goblins. It's much more clever than that. But because of its character-centered nature, I don't think you can get a Stephen King book that is more exemplary and typical, but in a very good way. If you want to know what Stephen King is like, I guess I would recommend The Shining first, because it shows everything he likes to do and can do so well. So that's the classic out of the way. Let me now move to a modern Stephen King book that I think is really worth your time. And I'm going to choose maybe a slightly unusual one here. I'm going to choose Revival. Revival, written in 2013. Again, trying to avoid spoilers, is all about a young boy as he reaches adulthood. It's not a coming of age story. The story's in kind of two parts. You've got the young man's story and then the middle-aged man's story, this boy who then grows up into adulthood. And the story is all about this young man trying to come to terms with what has happened to him in his past, and characters around him who are similarly trying to come to terms with what's happened in their past. Stephen King, in about 300 or 350 pages, I don't think this novel is overly long, to be honest, packs such a punch here, man. And he does it while keeping a tight razor focus on a couple of characters, makes you feel what they are going through, while never absolving them of what they do. And the ending is just magnificent. I don't want to say for better, for worse, but of all the endings of Stephen King's, I think this one is one of the ones that shows he really can write an ending that emotionally hits you exactly the way it wants to. So without going any further into it, Revival would be a really good pick if you're looking for a more recent Stephen King work. What if you're looking for a smaller book that you can get through in a day or two? If you want some kind of slim, compact thing that will show you what Stephen King is like without a huge time investment. Now for that, I have gone back and forth between two books which are actually very similar to each other, The Running Man and The Long Walk. I'm going to choose The Long Walk for the purpose of this video. However, The Running Man is still very worth your time, very much worth your time. The Long Walk is in that same narrative as Squid Game, as The Hunger Games, as Battle Royale. You have 100 boys who line up on a road and are televised walking down this road. I think they have to remain at 3 miles an hour, 2 miles an hour, something like that. If they get behind that pace, they are shot dead. I read this book in one sitting, and I so rarely read books in one sitting. I prefer to read 4 or 5 books very slowly at the same time, but I could not put this novel down. This bleak sense of tragedy as the boys themselves have signed up to do this and watching the consequences unfold. I think the closest parallel to this book is Squid Game. However, Squid Game has much more of I mean, you could debate this, but a bit more of a rise up against the system kind of a feel to it, and whether it's possible to beat this system that has put you into this exploitative situation. The Long Walk is much more about the unraveling and what happens when you cannot escape that system. It is such a good book. He wrote it, I believe, when he was a teenager, Stephen King, in about 5 or 6 weeks. It is well worth your time, and it's not one that I think is discussed too much. It's kind of one of the more original Death Game books. The Running Man, though, is also worth your time. It's very similar, written in about the same era. Written before Carrie, I believe. Yeah, The Long Walk, absolutely go for it. And if you haven't read The Long Walk and you're still a diehard Stephen King fan, you've got to do that too. But let's move on to book number 4, which is what if you want a big chunky book. You don't want something that you can get through in a day, you want something that you can slow burn through on a vacation for a couple of weeks or even a few weeks. I had a few different ideas here. I chucked out It, because I find it hard to recommend it because of a certain scene at the end that we all know about, but I won't discuss. I found it hard to discuss to recommend The Stand initially, because the first 300, 400 pages are all set up, and maybe it can be a bit overpowering, that setup. Under the Dome I don't like, I'll be honest. Duma Key is really good. I think you could put that in maybe a classic Stephen King category because it does everything so well, but I'm not going to recommend that one either. I am going to recommend to you 11/22/63, which I think is actually Stephen King's best big book, if it counts as a big book. It's about 700 pages, so your mileage may vary there. The Stand is about 1,400 pages. 11/22/63, man decides to go into the past to prevent the Kennedy assassination, which sounds so stupid, but it's so good. I think what makes this novel so good is King very cleverly, can't speak at the end of the day, doesn't make his character go back into 1963. He makes the man go back into, I think, 1958, his protagonist, Jake, I believe. And this allows this lovely, luxurious, lavish story to unfold that is all about the characters and the interactions they face. It's really quite a slice of life book for the first 2/3, where the protagonist gets to know 1950s America for better, for worse. And you can tell that Stephen King has poured so much energy into the research of this book. There's also really clever original concepts regarding time travel and trying to change the future. It's not as simple as just do thing X, thing Y happens. The time is almost like a conscious entity in this book that is trying to change and kind of stay rigid on the course that it's set on. It is a brilliant book. The ending, again, proves that Stephen King can write an ending when he puts his mind to it. It is wonderful, it is glorious, and I would maybe have to do a reread and do a proper spoiler review of it, because just talking about it makes me want to go back to it. Hello, my phone died halfway through that video, and I thought I'd lost the files, but I'd recovered it. Rather than deleting the whole thing and starting again, I thought I'd try to splice these 2 videos together. Book number 5 is The Gunslinger by Stephen King. Now, obviously by Stephen King. Now, some of you might say that is a terrible place to start. A lot of people don't like The Gunslinger very much. This is going to be my recommendation if you are going to commit to Stephen King. If you know that King is something you want to get into, someone whose work you want to get into, you could start with The Gunslinger, and I think it would be a really good place to begin with the apostrophe that you have, or with the asterisk, I should say, that you have to get through The Gunslinger and maybe the first half of The Drawing of the Three, which is the sequel to The Gunslinger, because it's really the start of book 2 where you see how brilliant book 1 is. Because what book 1 is like is this magical, ethereal, kind of foggy book that has a lot going on, but you don't really understand what's going on until later on down the line. But it's got such a good sense of place. The first 3 pages or so of The Gunslinger is just this excellent descriptive world building. That comes across so effectively. I love it so much for that. The main character is someone who you might not necessarily enjoy, kind of like The Shining, kind of like Revival, but he is as well a very compelling character. And The Gunslinger is so good because it's just got this amazing world building and this really inventive, creating world building. It's very clear in The Dark Tower, which this is the first book of, if I haven't mentioned that already, that Stephen King is making it up as he goes along. It's very clear that he's just joyfully, creatively, exuberantly just making up this story as he goes to see what will happen. And that is not a critique, that is a positive, because I love this book for that so much. Every single page is just buzzing, and I think I said something similar about Dungeon Crawler Carl actually. Every single page is just buzzing with this vibrant sense of creativity, and in some sense it is Stephen King at his best, because that creativity just is pouring off the page. So if you're willing to start with The Gunslinger and commit to the first, let's say, 150 pages of the drawing of the 3, it would be a wonderful place to go. So those are my 5 recommendations, if I can edit these 2 videos together. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know if you've read any of these books, if you're planning to start Stephen King, and how you find him as an author. This again wraps up the trilogy that I've been trying to make for the past couple of weeks, but there will be more Stephen King content, more to come. Thank you very much for your time. I will see you on the next one. Peace.